Welcome back. In our last video, we discussed Albert Einstein's special theory of relativity and compared it to Aristotelian logic. So according to Aristotle, we changed one word in it to make it much better reflection of reality. In this exciting video, we're going to have another lecture. We're going to have a lecture about building a fountain of youth. Well, how will we do that? Well, we're going to terraform Mars and discuss how to do that. And this terraforming of Mars will produce certain results. Like, how would you like to live as a 22, 25, 28-year-old for the rest of your life? If you're old now, how would you like to go back to being a 22 to 28-year-old? Also, longevity. How would you like to increase your lifespan? Hundreds of years, thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. Seems pretty strange. How would you like to solve climate change on this planet? By using climate change to solve all the climate change problems, or at least most of them. And we'll also be discussing other curious facts. So this is going to be a long video, but it should be very interesting if you're interested in extending your lifespan and living it as youth, a youth in your 20s. But first, let's go into some history lessons. In Christianity, there are three names for the same God: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. In Egyptian theology, there are three names for this God: Nu, Nun, Noon. Nu, male; Nun, female; Noon, non-gender. This God was a minor god of the Egyptian pantheon. Even though this is an Egyptian god, Noon did not have a following in any of the Egyptian cities. I will call this god by his last name, Noon. Noon is the god of primordial waters. It is depicted as a body of water above the planet in Egyptian theology. So we have the earth, the sky, and then the noon. This body of water is mentioned in Jewish Christian theology in Genesis as the canopy or firmament, where God builds this barren world with a vast ocean above the sky. 900 miles away from Egypt, there was the Sumerian culture. They had the same beliefs as the Egyptians to this body of water, that the world was surrounded by a body of water. So you have three different cultures: Egyptians, Sumerians, and Hebrews. Different languages, different cultures, different gods, but they all believed that the world had a body of water surrounding the planet. What a coincidence. One of China's creation myths was a turtle on an island surrounded by water. The Indus Valley civilization mentions pillars of waters in the beginning of this world. So we have two more civilizations alluding to a body of water. Mankind's first recorded story, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was a king of Uruk in Mesopotamia, and he was a Hercules type of a man. Gilgamesh met Utnapishtim, and Utnapishtim is called Noah in the Bible. And Gilgamesh met Utnapishtim on the island of life, surrounded by the waters of death, after the great flood. The book of Enoch mentions a vast ocean of water above the sky. The book of Enoch is so old that it wasn't canonized. So what are the odds that all these similar myths about a vast ocean above the sky that were thought about at the same time in various places of the planet? What are the odds? 1 billion to 1? 1 trillion to 1? What does that have to do with climate change, terraforming Mars, terraforming Earth into Gaia planets? Let's go to Mars. All right, we're hovering above the planet Mars. Looks interesting. Mars has a polar ice cap. It's also got, looks like a big pimple there, about in the middle of the planet. Let's get a closer look. That is Olympus Mons, or Mount Olympus if you speak English. It's the biggest volcano and the biggest mountain in the solar system. Now that would be a tourist attraction. It's twice as tall as Mount Everest and as big as the state of Arizona. It's 370 miles across. That would be a wonderful nature hike, to hike that mountain. It's got a slight incline to it as you're going up and a slight decline as you're going down, except for exactly at the rim. I also like to watch the birds and the bees and the plants on my nature hikes, but Mount Olympus looks pretty barren. Okay, well, let's go to another feature of Mars. Okay, there's Mars again, and look, there's a cut there about a third of the way up from the bottom of the planet. Let's even get a closer look of that. Okay. That is Valles Marineris, or Mariner's Valley if you speak English. That's 2,500 miles long, which is 10 times the size of the Grand Canyon. Pretty big and impressive. It's 120 miles wide and over 4 miles deep. When we go there as a tourist, I'd like to hike that from point to point. It'll take several months to do that. That would be, and it's 4 miles down and 4 miles up to the surface as you go deeper into the cut. I'm thinking every decade we should do a Martian nature walk. Everybody's invited. But there's a problem. Mars is pretty barren. It doesn't have any plants or animals. Number one is atmosphere. The Martian atmosphere is 95% carbon dioxide, which would say, yeah, you could have plants use that to breathe, but no bugs nor no animals. Humans can't breathe carbon dioxide and survive, at least not at a 95% rate. Another problem is atmospheric pressure. Now, Mars has 38% of the gravity of Earth. So if you take a square inch, about that size, and you put that down at the bottom of the surface of the Earth, and you go all the way to the top of the atmosphere, that 1 inch contains 14.7 pounds of atmosphere. Pretty impressive. Every inch, there's 14.7 pounds of atmosphere. Now, if you do that to Mars, you take the same inch, you go to the surface of Mars, and you go all the way to the top of the atmosphere, there's 0.1. pounds per square inch. That's the 1/10 of a pound, obviously. So the Martian atmosphere is really light compared to Earth. Earth's atmosphere is 147 times bigger, more stuff than Mars. Another problem that Mars has is that it has no magnetic field. So the sun creates solar winds, has coronal mass ejections, which pushes out charged particles. Also in the universe, in the galaxy, we have cosmic rays that are surrounding us. All these radiated particles get caught by Earth's magnetic field and protects us from a direct assault from these radiations. Mars has no magnetic field. So if you were a plant or an animal and you were walking along the surface, you would be bombarded by cosmic rays. And if the sun had a solar mass ejection, you would be bombarded by those charged particles. You'd basically slow cook on the planet. So those are the two problems that Mars has. Now, I said that Mars has a lack of gravity, 38%. So even if we borrow oxygen from Earth or another planet, you put the oxygen and the nitrogen on the surface of Mars, it will simply blow away in the solar winds due to the lack of gravity. So we need to find a solution that would increase the atmospheric pressure to 14.7, which is what we have here on Earth, and we need protection from the cosmic rays. So we need Mars to have a magnetic field. So does anybody have any solutions? No one, huh? How about the god Noon? Remember at the start of this video I discussed what the Egyptians believed and what the Sumerians believed? And what is this god Noon? It is a body of water in low orbit surrounding a planet. So in essence, it's a bubble completely around the planet. Now, what would this bubble do? This bubble, even at 38% of Earth's gravity, that water ocean, the Noon, would collapse to the surface. But if we fill it full of atmosphere at the same time, oxygen, nitrogen, or some other neutral gas, it'll be pressuring out. So we have the water going this way because of gravity and the pressure of the atmosphere pushing up. So in other words, they're in balance, they're equal. So what would this do? This would create an Earth-like, or we could even go to a Gaia-style atmosphere on the planet Mars. Looking from the surface, you'd be looking up and seeing a body of water completely surrounding your planet. But you would be able to breathe. Now this Noon can transform any stony planet like Earth or a moon to an Earth-like environment or a Gaia-type environment. The Noon would retain the atmosphere to the planet, thus maintaining a constant optimum environment. Controlled weather, controlled temperature and pressure, no highs, no lows, no sudden changes in the weather. It is indirect heating of the planet. Right now, the sun heats Mars or the Earth directly. with a noon, the sun heats the noon, and then the noon heats the planet below it. It's mostly water, but with additives and a structural change to keep the bubble from bursting and from raining down on the surface. Before we leave Mars, I want to do a sidebar. So according to ancient Greeks, the planet Electra blew up. This theoretically is what we know as the asteroid belt. There is speculation that Mars was a moon of Electra. Just keep that in mind for later on in the video. So this is how we could convert Mars to an Earth-like or Gaia environment. But right now I have another sidebar. Electra created the asteroid belt when it blew up, theoretically. In this asteroid belt, there's one particular asteroid called Psyche 16. And it's different than all the other parts of the asteroid belt. This is nearly a pure metal asteroid. It is speculated that this is the molten core of the planet Electra. This asteroid is 173 miles wide of iron, nickel, gold, silver, and all sorts of other metals and precious metals. When a planet breaks up, this is what the core of the planet would look like. This nearly solid metal asteroid, when mined, could make every individual on this planet a millionaire at today's current prices. Of course, as we start mining Psyche 16, the prices will start dropping. Aluminum was one time in our history more precious than gold. Due to technological advances and the discovery of more mines, aluminum became less and less expensive and became lower than gold and is now a base metal. Psyche 16 can provide enough gold to make gold as cheap as aluminum. So in the future, you may have gold foil in your kitchen instead of aluminum foil, simply based on the abundance of gold coming from Psyche 16. Precious metals will no longer be precious. So we have a barren planet, Mars, in our solar system that is deadly to plants and animals on the surface without special protection. Can you imagine coming out of a pressurized metal tube every day, putting on a bulky spacesuit, going outside? One tear in your suit and you're dead. To construct a noon, we would need to take 200 feet off the top of the surface of all of the Earth's oceans. That would be the main bulk of the noon. With the noon in place, the atmospheric pressure would arise. Another 100 feet of the ocean's water from the surface going down would evaporate into the atmosphere. So the entire world's humidity would go up. Now there would be no rain on a planet with a noon at the proper atmospheric pressure, but there would be dew. So you could forego hurricanes, typhoons, tornadoes, strong winds, and all the other destructive weather events that we currently have here on an unprotected Earth. So to build the entire noon on Earth, we would need to take 300 feet off the top of every ocean. This would, of course, lower the sea level by 300 feet. 200 feet of that sea level would be to actually physically construct the noon above the firmament. 100 feet of ocean water would be evaporated into the atmosphere, thus increasing humidity everywhere. The deserts would no longer be deserts. They would turn into grasslands, savannas. The polar regions, due to the indirect heating of the noon, would turn into forest and grasslands. Everywhere would be pleasant. The seasons would, for the most part, disappear. The foliage would continue to drop in the northern and southern hemispheres due to a lack of light. The noon does not disperse the light, although it does modify it. So your vegetation in the wintertime would lose light, would lose leaves due to a lack of light, but the temperature would still remain mild. Effectively, this would double the useful land mass on the planet Earth, and we would increase our land mass by lowering the sea level by 300 feet. So all the countries of the world that have a coastal region could expand out into the ocean, which would now be dry land. And the sea level obviously is lowered by 300 feet. The firmament that the Bible mentions is the first layer of the noon. It is right adjacent to the atmosphere. So you have the surface of the planet, the atmosphere, and then you have a firmament, which is the first layer of the noon. And the firmament keeps the water above the atmosphere from falling down to the surface. So we have the idea of building a noon. Where are we going to get all the materials from? Now, Mars doesn't have an atmosphere except of very light carbon dioxide. Where are you going to get all the other atmospheric gases? There's plenty of oxygen and water from the ice planets Neptune and Uranus. So they're very large and could easily cover Mars. We don't have to borrow any water or oxygen or atmosphere from Earth. The Martian atmosphere is 95% carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is used for plant growth, but it is not in sufficient quantities or sufficient pressure. Jupiter has a moon called Europa. Europa's atmosphere is mostly carbon dioxide. So we use that carbon dioxide for plant growth in the Martian atmosphere. On Earth, we have nitrogen as our base gas that composes mostly of our atmosphere. Saturn's moon Titan has lots of nitrogen in their atmosphere. Take the nitrogen from Titan and transfer it to Mars. Our current technology and science is not capable of taking all these gases from distant worlds and transporting them to Mars. But if we were able to manipulate gravity, then harvesting of the gases on distant planets would be possible. My good friend and colleague, Sir Francis Bring Home the Bacon, said, in his most famous quote, "Knowledge is power." He also said, "To command nature, you must obey nature." So I've adapted that saying, and said, "To command gravity, you must obey gravity." But I will expound on gravity generators, gravity jets, and gravity streams a bit further on in this video. We have the physical materials to construct an atmosphere on the planet Mars from other planets and moons, and we can logically understand that a noon has the physical structure to contain the atmosphere and protect Mars. Where did I come up with this idea of a noon? By studying human history and the gods. What is the evidence that there was a noon around our planet? So talking about the noon sounds like crazy talk. So let me tell you another story. In the 1800s, all the smart people on Earth thought that rocks flying in the atmosphere was just nonsense, stupid talk, crazy talk. Rocks don't fly. You can throw them up in the air, toss them up, but they just fall back down to the surface. Even though there were reports, eyewitness accounts of rocks streaking through the atmosphere, most burning up in the sky, but even some hitting the ground. Science eventually explained in the early 1800s about modern meteorite theory. So what was considered nonsense and myths and crazy talk turned out to be true. So even though you're thinking this might be crazy talk, in the past, all the smart people have changed their minds and said, yes, rocks do come from space, and the big rocks, meteorites, comets, parts of comets and meteorites travel through space, and some of them hit the Earth's atmosphere and even make it to the surface. So let's do some conceptual thinking. According to modern physics, the universe is 13 to 14 billion years old. In our galaxy, it is estimated to have 500 million to 40 billion Earth-like planets. Let's take a very conservative estimate and say there are only 1 billion Earth-like planets in our galaxy. Now, the current theories is that life formed on this planet when lightning struck a pool of primordial water. There are another two competing theories, that life came from outer space, but where did that life come from? Or cells formed in the depths of the ocean. These three theoretical events can occur on any planet in our galaxy. And we are saying there are 1 billion planets in the galaxy, just for this conceptual thinking. We're currently working on trying to achieve fusion power. When we achieve fusion power, we will be able to produce spaceships that can go up to 1/10 the speed of light. The Milky Way galaxy is 100,000 light years across. A non-stop trip from one end of the galaxy to the other at 1/10 the speed of light would be 1 million years. So humans traveling at 1/10 the speed of light, starting at Earth, will be able to colonize every Earth-like planet in the Milky Way galaxy in the short span of, say, 10 million years, which includes a 90% of the time rest stop on the various planets that we discover. So we have 1 billion Earth-like planets, 14 billion years of time. Do the math. This Earth should have been terraformed and colonized many times before life began on this planet. The odds are 1 billion to 1 that Earth is not our home world. Someone did terraform this planet with the noon. Another circumstantial proof. Historically speaking, our ancestors said there was a noon around this planet. Mankind's oldest civilizations wrote down that there was a noon. One of the oldest books, if not the oldest book on this planet, is the Book of Enoch. Enoch said it was there. A vast ocean above the sky. In the Sumerian civilization, the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim, is surrounded by the waters of death on the island of life. The waters of death. I wonder what fell down from the sky. So the noon collapsed and caused a great deal of death. And we have tall tales of other civilizations about the Great Flood, the pillars of water, and the land surrounded by water at creation. The Hebrews traveled from Sumeria to Egypt. Both Egypt and Sumeria says the noon was there. The ancient Egyptians named a god after it. Moses, the author of the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, said it was there. And he got his information from the high priest of Egypt, or God. The Garden of Eden, or a Gaia planet, has the optimum atmospheric pressure for human and plants and animals. And now we're thinking about building a noon around Mars to terraform it. And we can terraform Earth again and make it a better planet, which will solve a lot of the climate change problems. Another proof, or circumstantial evidence, is the Nazca lines in Peru. The Great Super Mound of Ohio. The geoglyphs of the Atacama Desert in Chile. Even the face on Mars. All these artifacts are on the surface, exposed to the sky, to space. The Nazca lines cannot be seen as an artwork except from a plane flying overhead or from space. A noon is composed mostly of water. Have you ever been beside a lake, river, or pool of water? When the water is calm and the light is right, you can see a reflection of yourself or other objects in the water. If there was a noon above Earth, composed mostly of water, you could see your reflection in the noon. So the noon would be in orbit 20 to 30 miles above us, compressing down on the atmosphere. So standing in Peru, looking up before the noon collapsed, you could see the Nazca lines. Or if you were on Mars back in the good old times, you could look up at Mars and see the face of Mars. Another proof. The woolly mammoths died out shortly after the end of the so-called Ice Age. Scientists tested frozen woolly mammoths' blood and discovered that their blood was anemic. That is to say, their red blood cell count was very low. Anemic blood doesn't allow sufficient amounts of oxygen to get to the cells of a body to do the activities of life. They would have been very slow moving at best. They would have been hunted out and died as soon as they became a species due to this inability to move quickly. It would have been a struggle for them to find food, and they would have starved to death. In the 1960s, the U.S. Navy conducted tests using aquanauts to determine if humans could live underwater in a pressurized environment. This test was called Sea Lab. The aquanauts lived and worked in a habitat 30 feet underwater. That is, living in 2 atmospheres of pressure, going from 14.7 pounds to 29.4 pounds per square inch. So you have 14.7 pounds of atmosphere above you per square inch. You add 30 to 33 feet of water above that, you've doubled your atmospheric pressure. After 30 days of living and working underwater, the Sea Lab medical doctor stopped the experiment. The doctor found out that the red blood count of these aquanauts had dropped 30%. The blood was changing due to the increased atmospheric pressure. The human body was adapting to the changing environment. If the test continued, the aquanauts would have suffocated as soon as they came back to the surface. Not due to a lack of oxygen in the atmosphere, but due to a lack of hemoglobin, red blood cells, in their body. The oxygen would have gotten into the lungs by normal breathing, but the red blood cells would not be there to carry the oxygen to the other parts of the body. So the theory is, if there was a noon above the planet, it increases the atmospheric pressure, just like the Sea Lab experiment. The noon collapses, and the pressure goes to what we have today, 14.7 pounds per square inch. A noon collapsing on a planetary scale would have caused flash freezing on various parts of the surface at various times. We would expect to find frozen woolly mammoths with undigested food in their mouths and stomachs, and their blood would have been flash frozen with the red blood cells for the atmospheric pressure they were living in. The woolly mammoths could not exist in our current environment because the red blood cell count was too low. But wait a minute, I hear you say. We have carbon dating, isotope dating that gives a timeline on how old things were. So what I'm talking about is nonsense, stupid talk. Well, first of all, isotope dating measures isotopes, not time. Isotopes deteriorate at a certain rate, and so then we extend that out, saying based on the number of isotopes in a particular sample, this item, this object is so many years old. The dating comes from isotope deterioration. So how does carbon-14 come into existence? Carbon is 12 in a molecule form, not 14. So those 2 extra carbon-14s, 12 plus 2 equals 14, they're cosmic rays coming from outer space through the atmosphere and they hit a normal carbon molecule of 12, C12, and change it into an isotope, a carbon molecule of C14. Then, over a period of time, it deteriorates back to a C12 molecule. But what if our ancestors were telling the truth? A noon, 120 feet thick, a body of water completely surrounding the Earth. The cosmic rays that create isotope C14 would be blocked by the noon. A trivial amount of cosmic rays would reach the surface to create the carbon-14 molecule. Every carbon dating would give a false reading because the presumption is that there was no noon. Another proof of the noon's existence is the Missoula floods. The Missoula flood was a mega flood. This was 1,000 feet of water coming down the Columbia River in the northwestern part of the United States. This occurred, according to carbon dating, anywhere from 10 to 15,000 years ago. Scientists speculate that there was a great ice dam during the Ice Age because simply we need 1,000 feet of water and there's no great lake there and there's no natural blockage. So it is speculated that this ice dam held back these massive volumes of water and that created the mega flood, the Missoula floods. However, the scientists that came up with this theory have no idea what the noon is. And of course, the noon is a body of water about 120 feet thick, give or take a cubit, in orbit above the planet. So all this water in orbit above the planet is collapsing. It's got to go somewhere. So I speculate that the mega flood, the Missoula floods, anywhere from 10 to 14,000 years ago, came from the noon, not an ice dam. Another proof that the noon existed are fossil records. In Ontario, Canada, there are alligator fossils on the Canadian side of Lake Ontario. These fossilized records are dated to 100,000 years ago, more or less. So 100,000 years ago, the climate of Ontario, Canada was extremely warm as compared to today. For the temperature to be like Florida or the tropics, to allow for alligators, the temperature of the planet at the equator would have to be at a minimum of 120 degrees on a cool day. So at that temperature rating, there would be enough heat to push it north to reach Ontario, Canada, and make it warm enough for alligators to live, which certainly is not what is happening today in our world. The equator was not a forbidden zone where no life could exist because at 120 degrees plus temperature, there's no life. Bugs don't even exist 100,000 years ago. So, but a noon, which our ancestors stated, would transfer the heat. So the sun heats the noon disperses all that heat evenly throughout the planet, and that heat can then reach Ontario, Canada, and you can have alligators up in Ontario, Canada. So, and no life existed 100,000 years ago at the equator, or there was a noon transferring the heat up to Ontario, Canada. So alligators could have died there and left their fossils there. These are some proofs of the existence of the noon. A side note, since we're living under a noon in a higher atmospheric pressure, and the atmosphere is constant, whether you're at sea level or on the top of the mountain, the atmospheric pressure is the same. So balloons will no longer float up, but you'll be able to walk up Mount Everest without any special gear. It'll be a nice nature hike because you'll be getting the same amount of oxygen as if you were at sea level as you're on top of Mount Everest. So the effects of a noon on humans. We're turning Mars into a Gaia planet, and we're turning Earth back to a Gaia planet. Your warm-blooded body operating temperature will be lower. And as I mentioned before, your blood would lose most of its red blood cells. That's one physiological change. Your lifespan. We have documented records from the Bible. And we also have documented records from the Sumerian civilization, the Sumerian Kings List, which shows the ages of all the rulers of ancient Sumeria. And the closer you get to the noon before the collapse, the longer the lifespan increases. So changing the environment that you live in will change your lifespan. So we went from a Gaia planet to the planet we have now. And we're going back again once we rebuild the noon. The Bible says 600 to 900 years would be the average lifespan. The Sumerian Kings List says that you'll live hundreds of years longer, thousands of years longer, tens of thousands of years longer, and hundreds of thousands of years longer. So if we increase our lifespan to 100,000 years by changing the environment, most likely you never age. You will simply be 22 to 28 years old and stay that way until an oops happens. What's an oops? That's where you make a mistake and die. Someone forgot to put fuel in the airplane and you crashed. Or you like to speed with your car and you crashed. Or you go swimming underwater and get eaten by a shark, but you don't die from old age. Old age, aging is an environmental condition, according to the noon theory. So you only age because you're in a bad environment, if the Sumerian Kings List is correct. If the Bible is correct, then simply a longer lifespan. You get 600 to 900 years. Some will certainly get up to 1,200 years lifespan, but you'll age normally just much more slowly. So if you're 80 years old, you'll have a 13-year-old body. So that is the effect of what a noon will have on your lifespan and your physiology. Sociology speaking, in the battle of the sexes between men and women in a noon environment, men, we're going to lose the war. My good friend and colleague, Isaiah the prophet, wrote, "In that day, so few men will be left that 7 women will fight for each man." Currently, the male to female ratio on Earth is 101 males born for every 100 females born. There's nothing fixed about this ratio. It can be altered through environmental manipulation. Now, here's an interesting fact about oxygen ratios and pressure. Currently in the oceans, there are areas of low oxygen dissolved in the water. The fishes breathe in this dissolved oxygen. These low oxygen areas have higher than normal male to female fish ratios. There are more male fish born when the water has low oxygen content. If we increase the oxygen or increase its pressure, will the opposite effect happen? Will there be more females born? When the noon is built, the nitrogen-oxygen ratio is the same, but the pressure is increased. So do you see these things here? These are called breasts, but they only function if you're female, but we all have them. So why do we all have female attributes if they only work on females? It's because in a Gaia atmosphere, like a noon atmosphere, that we will have a higher ratio of females born than males. The zygote determines to remain female because we're in a noon environment that promotes more females than males. The male-female ratio is altered in favor of females in a higher oxygen atmospheric pressure. That is a noon environment. The higher pressure will mean that oxygen molecule will touch the zygote in the vagina more often. This touching of oxygen gives information to the zygote that the environment is richer in oxygen. The environment is better and easier to live in. The effect of this information transfer will produce more females than males. About 7 females born to every male. When times are good, evolutionary speaking, it is better to have more females than males. Every lion will have its pride. Beer fermentation, as another side note, will be more difficult because of the higher oxygen. You won't get as much bacteria. Your health will be better. You'll be stronger physiologically. There'll be less disease. Birth defects will probably drop 90%, would be a good guess, because you're in a better environment. There are many advantages to building a noon besides longevity. Strength will increase. Your air to fuel mixture ratio inside the body will give you increased strength. So how do we construct a noon? First, we have to get a quote from my good friend and colleague, Sir Francis Bacon. Necessity is the mother of invention. We need a better understanding of gravity, and we need a new tool, a gravity generator that produces a gravity jet. In Einstein's theory of relativity, gravity is a warping of the space-time continuum that is created by mass. There are problems with this theory, but it was the best theory they had at the time to describe gravity. It is impossible to build a noon using modern physics, but we can build it using antediluvian physics. I won't go into the nuts and bolts of how a gravity generator, a gravity jet, works, but here's an image of what it would look like from a user's point of view, very basically. In this image, you see electrical power going into the gravity generator. It converts electrical power into a gravity jet that you see here as light coming out of the top. The light in the image is there just for illustrative purposes only. You cannot see gravity. If a human is on top of the gravity generator, when it is turned on, you will fall up instead of falling down. So human falls up, the atmosphere falls up inside of the jet. And any bird flying through the jet will fall up. It'll think it's upside down. This propulsion method will be about 99% cheaper than sending rockets up into space. It will be so cheap that we can send seawater up into orbit. And we will send about 200 feet of the Earth's ocean water up into orbit to prepare for building the Moon. And the water is the main ingredient of the Moon. Additional information about the gravity jet. Galileo theorized that a feather and a cannonball would drop at the same rate towards the center of gravity, the Earth, regardless of the mass. Certainly a feather has less mass than a cannonball. So in a vacuum, a feather drops at the same rate as a cannonball. And this was proved by our astronauts on the Moon, where they dropped a feather and a ball, and it dropped at the same rate. So gravity defies mass. It doesn't care what the mass is. You'll travel at the same speed. And so it is with a gravity jet. You will actually fall up at the same rate, regardless of whether you are a feather, a cannonball, a space capsule, or a mountain. So gravity jet is slow, 20 miles an hour, 200 miles an hour, but its chief advantage is that it doesn't care about mass. So you get into a capsule, get pushed above a gravity jet, turn the gravity jet on, and you will fall up towards outer space, into space, at 20 miles an hour, 200 miles an hour, depending on the strength of the gravity jet. So mass does not matter when it concerns gravity. And gravity comes from a wave, but it is not a wave. So Einstein speculated that there were gravity waves, which is not correct. But he is correct that gravity can be concentrated like a wave, and therefore all our redshift calculations are incorrect. Another curious fact: a gravity generator uses lots of electrical power to create a gravity stream. The power requirements would be too much for our current science to produce. However, we have been trying to create fusion power plants for the past half century. The problem is that we have been using magnetic fields to contain the plasma fuel for fusion power, deuterium, tritium. The plasma pressure is too strong for the weak magnetic fields. Nature uses gravity to contain fusion reactions in stars like our sun. A gravity generator produces directional gravity, as in a gravity jet. It will be possible to contain the fusion reaction using gravity jets. Whether it is economical is a different question, but we can contain a sustainable fusion reaction. Theory of the Moon, the theory of the gravity generator. Mass distorts gravity, but it does not create gravity. Gravity comes from a wave, but it is not a wave. So, historically speaking, we have references to the Great Flood in the Sumerian accounts, into the biblical accounts, which comes from Moses, who is a prince of Egypt, which comes from also the Hebrews, that the noon collapsed and the Great Flood occurred. Mathematically speaking, using the clues, the noon was about 122 feet thick, surrounding the Earth. It collapsed, blew off some of our atmosphere, and created the environment we have today. To create a noon, you need a gravity jet. To build a prototype would take about $10 million. To build the noon would take about $122 trillion. And when I did the calculation, these are all in 2003 dollars. So it's even going to be more in today's time period. But we have all the necessary equipment necessary to build a gravity generator. And we have a theory of what gravity really is. Not as Einstein said, but it is a wave, non-wave. So a gravity generator generates a spatial gravity push using electrical power. Einstein believes there are gravity waves. Oh, here's a contradiction between modern physics and Einstein. Einstein speculates that there are gravity waves, but if there are gravity waves, then there's no constant gravity. A certain amount of gravity produces a certain amount of mass produces a certain amount of gravity. But if there are gravity waves, as Einstein speculates, then gravity cannot be constant throughout the universe. If gravity is not constant, i.e. there are gravity waves, then all our redshift calculations are incorrect. Stars and galaxies at distant worlds could have increased gravitonic pressure without the mass increasing, because gravity waves can be concentrated. And we can see these effects in our space. We see anomalies in space. Galaxy is gobbling up another galaxy, except the one galaxy gobbling up the other galaxy are billions of light years away. And yet we see through our physical eyes that they're right next to each other. So this would conclude that Einstein was correct and that our redshift calculations on distant worlds and galaxies is incorrect. Because that, according to the gravity jet theory, gravity is not a wave, but it does come from a wave. So the noon collapsed, according to historical records. Both Egypt, through Moses, the prince of Egypt, creating the Torah, and the Sumerians, referencing the waters above in the Great Flood, both said the noon collapsed. Noon could have collapsed through war, through a engineering, architectural defect, lack of maintenance. Supposedly the gods or God left and stopped maintaining it. And this would cause eventually a collapse through the friction of the atmosphere and the noon without proper maintenance. So we, the living, would have to make sure that their mistakes of our ancestors does not occur again. So in conclusion, our ancestors, or extraterrestrials, or the gods, or a god, put us on this planet. It was terraformed for our benefit, surrounded by a noon, the firmament. In this transformation, it terraformed a barren, stony planet into the Earth, a Gaia Earth that we had. Now we have 4 planets in our solar system that are eligible: Earth, Mars, Electra, and Venus. This will give us 4 habitable planets as the base to expand into the galaxy. Depending on how effective the gravity generator is, the gravity jet is, will depend on the cost of building a noon. I speculate that the cost of rebuilding the noon will be $122 trillion in 2003 dollars. You could say 18,000 per man, woman, and child. So you could say $17,000 to $18,000 per man, woman, and child on the planet. So we can re-terraform our planet, Earth, back to the Gaia paradise that it should have been, that was made to be. We can do the same thing for Mars. Mars would take $600 to $800 trillion to make it an Earth-like Gaia planet. You'll have 38% gravity as of Earth, but the atmospheric pressure will remain the same because the noon will contain the atmosphere. Electra. Electra is the asteroid belt where a planet used to be. The current theory about the asteroid belt is that it was formed during the formation of the sun. But then how do you explain Psyche 16, which is a solid asteroid made out of iron, metals? It is speculated that it is the interior, the core of Electra when it blew up. Electra could have blown up by a wandering planet. They got too close and the gravity tore it apart. Could have been a war again. Somehow the gods or humans develop powerful weapons to break apart planets. With a gravity jet, it will take time, but we can put Electra back together again and make another stony planet, and then put a noon around that and have another planet that will be habitable. And Venus. Venus is surrounded by a thick atmosphere that a gravity jet can push away from the planet. So we can remove the atmosphere from Venus and replace it with oxygen and nitrogen from the rest of the elements of the solar system. And we can have planet number 4. So in this way, like I said, we will have 4 habitable planets for mankind in which to expand. So this gives us time to figure out how to do fast propulsion. Yesterday, you had a 100% chance of dying from old age. Now that chance is lower. Very longer, healthier lives, more plants growing around the planet, inhabitable lands now habitable, more land along the shoreline, no more storms, and the planet being climate controlled. You don't have to cool or heat your environment because the whole planet is cooled or heated. With a gravity jet, the fusion plasma containment problem is solved. Thus, we will be able to make fusion power plants and make space vessels with speeds up to 1/10 the speed of light and recolonize the Milky Way galaxy. My good friend and colleague, Sir Francis Bring Home the Bacon, said to me, "To control nature, you must obey nature. To control gravity, we must obey gravity." So by controlling gravity through a gravity generator, which produces a gravity jet, we can rebuild the noon, restore our lifespans to what it should be, either hundreds of years or tens of thousands of years, depending on which ancient civilization you believe. The noon was a terraforming technique from our ancestors to terraform this barren world to the Gaia planet it was, is not, and shall be again, and will give us 4 planets. And you can travel from planet to planet in our solar system because all the atmospheric pressure is the same. You won't have to adjust going from one gravity field to another because it doesn't matter, because the noon gives you the atmospheric pressure that you need, and it remains constant going from one planet to the other. So let's build a gravity jet and save our lives and the lives of future generations. So let's go build a gravity jet, restore the Earth to a Gaia environment, and save ourselves and our future generations. Till next time.